welcome to Keyboard Kaleidoscope. I'm Bob Estrin, and today we have a great show, a show about pedaling. I started with the Chopin Waltz. I was inspired to learn from one of the wonderful students in the Master Class series that we had here from very talented students from Orange County, California, who came in from the High School of the Arts. And one of these students came in and played that waltz, and I had never studied it, and I thought, you know what, that's a great piece, so I learned it. And this is the first time I performed it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Great piece, and I'm in the midst of learning a bunch of waltzes, which fits right into our show about pedaling, because who better than Frédéric Chopin to express the intricacies and the expressive possibilities of utilizing the pedals on the piano. After all, when you think about it, the piano, there's a lot of touch involved in the piano naturally, but for real shadings of tone, a great deal of expression is added by how the pedals are used. So today's show is dedicated to secrets of pedaling. And we're going to cover first an overview of the traditional three pedals of the piano. First, we start with the sustain pedal, or sometimes called the damper pedal. Now, the reason why this is called the sustain pedal or the damper pedal is because what it simply does is when you play a note on the piano, the hammer strikes the strings, which makes them vibrate. When you let go, a damper dampens the strings. So when you push down the sustain pedal, all of the dampers of all the strings are released. So all the notes that you play continue to sustain. Sometimes people call that pedal the loud pedal or the hold pedal. It has many different names, but it's all the same function. It simply holds notes that you can't hold with your fingers, because if you go from the low register to the high register, you need some way of holding all the notes down, and sometimes you can't do that just with your 10 fingers. So that's where that pedal comes in. It's on the right-hand side, as you're all probably familiar. With your right foot you play. And in a minute, I'll talk about how to approach the pedals physically. But right now, I just want to give an overview of the three pedals, and we're going to go into some depth, and I welcome your questions, too. So feel free, in your chat section of your browser, take a look over there. You can type in any kind of questions. I'll address them later in the show. And so if you have any specific pedaling questions about music you're playing, I welcome them here in the show today. The middle pedal is the solo sostenuto. And what it is, it's a selective hold pedal. And a lot of people don't know how that works. And indeed, it does different things on different pianos. So I'm going to get to that in more detail a little bit later. But suffice it to say, it's a very funny thing about the middle pedal, because I've been playing the piano for a long time, since I was 7 years old. I've studied music by, almost all of the great composers who you can think of, and yet have rarely used that middle pedal. It just isn't called upon very often at all. That's why a lot of people don't know what it does, but you're going to find out today, so stay logged on for that a little bit later in the show. The other pedal on the far left, operated with your left foot, is the una corda pedal. Some people call it the soft pedal, because indeed it does make the tone softer. How it does that is different, once again, on the piano that you have. I'll explain all the different things that these three pedals do on all different pianos. And you could find out in your own piano at home what those pedals do. Of course, the sustain pedal on the right really does the same thing on all pianos. So the first thing, before we start talking about what each of these pedals does, I'm going to talk about how to physically approach the pedals, because there's nothing more annoying in a piano performance than somebody who thumps the pedal, makes unnecessary noise. It distracts from the musical performance when this happens. And you've all heard it, I imagine. You've heard people who thump the pedal. So let's talk a little bit about how to approach the pedals, starting with the sustain pedal and how to approach them. And we can get a shot here. We can kind of look. You want to always keep your heel firmly planted on the floor, as mine is. And because if your foot is up like this, you have no control, and you're going to make noise with the pedal. And it makes a lot of noise in some pianos. So you want to put the heel down here and play with the ball of the foot right there. And always keep the foot in contact with the pedal. Otherwise, you get noise. You want to do it. And, there's a real art to this. Let me tell you why. Every piano, the sustain pedal is different. There are no two pianos that are exactly the same. and some are markedly different. I was very fortunate to grow up in a household where we had 3 or 4 pianos, so that, for example, there was a Steinway grand in one room where the pedal had almost no travel at all. It would move, maybe the entire motion of the pedal was less than an inch, maybe a half or 3/4 of an inch. And if I so much as leaned my foot on the pedal, even a little bit, it would sustain a little bit. So I had to be very careful to just barely touch that pedal. Otherwise, it would start holding the notes, even when I didn't want it to. Then I'd go downstairs where we had a couple of other grands. There was a Baldwin down there where you had to literally push that pedal further than the entire travel of the Steinway pedal before it would engage at all. So that pedal you could push down maybe half an inch before it did anything. It was only until you got past a certain point where then it would engage. And you'll find that pedals, if you play your piano at home and you try pianos in different places, maybe in hotels, schools, churches, friends' houses, you'll notice the first thing you should always check in a musical performance is check where that pedal engages. It's different on every piano, and you need to know that first thing before a musical performance. So that's a very important thing about the pedals. The question as to when to pedal is really so subjective, and there's so many things that you have to take into account. The easy answer, the simple answer, and the fundamental answer is you change pedals when the harmony changes, because you don't want to blur harmonies that don't go together. For example, if I'm going from a C major chord to an F major chord, if you put those together, you got the clashing of the E and the F in those two chords. You don't want that. But if you were playing something that was all basically a C major chord for a bunch of measures, you could leave one pedal down. For example, in this Heller etude comes to mind. Now that whole section is all C major, a C major 6 chord. So there's no need to change the pedal as long as the harmonies stay the same. There's the short answer. Of course, there are many other things to take into consideration. You know, not only does the piano, one piano to the next, vary tremendously with the pedal, but also the room you're playing in has a tremendous amount to do with the pedal. After all, what does the pedal do? It seems to give you a sustain and echoey effect. Suppose you're in a room that's very large, very reverberant room like a church or an auditorium that has hard walls and big space where you clap your hands and you hear an echo for a long time. In a room like that, if you use too much pedal, it can become very blurry. So in a room like that, you might not need to use quite as much as you would, for example, if you were playing in someone's living room with drapery, furniture, soft upholstered furniture, thick carpeting, all absorbing the sound, where you play a note and it doesn't live on at all. I can illustrate this with this instrument that has a reverb built in. If I play with no reverb, compared to playing with tremendous amount of reverb, naturally, if I was pedaling the very same passage with these two different settings, I would want to pedal differently. So let me try an example. I'll try another Heller etude. I'll try first with no reverb and what kind of pedaling I might use. I used a lot of pedal there, pedaling almost the entire time. Now if I turn it up, so now I'm in the huge room, I might use the pedal in the same places, but not hold it quite as long. Quite a different sound. If I had played it the same way twice, if I had pedaled the second time the way I pedaled the first time, it would get muddy like this. I'm going to play now the way I played it in the room that had no reverberation, but I'm going to play the pedaling like I did the first time. And listen how blurry it gets if I do that. gets a little bit muddy, a little bit indistinct. Likewise, if I turn the reverberation off, so we're once again in that living room I described, and pedal without enough pedal, the way I did in the big auditorium, it gets kind of a dry, not very expressive sound. Now you hear a tremendous difference between these two performances because I'm exaggerating. I'm playing exactly the wrong, I'm compensating in the opposite way from the way I should be. Whereas before, when I played these two performances in drastically different acoustical environments, the performances didn't sound quite so different because I compensated by using the pedal, using more pedal in the dry room and less pedaling in a reverberant room. This is something you simply have to use your ears for. A lot goes into this, and it just takes experience playing different pianos in different environments, and you'll get the hang of it. Let your ears be the judge. There isn't one right way to pedal or one wrong way. There are many different colors that you can create with a pedal. Best thing to do is experiment. I'm going to turn the reverb now back to a moderate level that's musical. Okay, how do you practice pedaling then? That's the question. What do you do? If it's all this elusive colors that you add to music, how can you practice such a thing? Well, step one, and this may sound like a contradiction, you must practice tremendously without the pedal to have any clue as to where to use the pedal appropriately. I think sometimes pianists make the mistake of incorporating the pedal too early in their performances. Learn your music thoroughly before you ever use the pedal, except maybe to run through your music when you're first learning it, just to see what it's going to be like. Sure, try it with a pedal because it sounds so much better. Once you're done experimenting, get to work. Learn the music without the pedal. Why? Well, I just heard a beginning piano, not a beginning, but somebody who's on an intermediate level, who had been away from the piano for a while, playing through a Chopin prelude, as a matter of fact, and they were using the pedal, and they were using atrocious fingering. Okay, what was wrong with the fingering was that they would not be able to connect anything with the fingering they were using, and they were using the pedal to substitute for what their fingers should have been doing. This is a great mistake in the piano. You should try to connect as much as possible with your fingers, using the pedal only to connect what you absolutely can't. If you introduce the pedal too early in your practice, you will have no idea where you can connect with your hands and where you can't, and you'll have fingering that is really working against you. So, to show how you could practice something that absolutely needs pedal without the pedal, to get it as legato as possible, I'm going to play a little bit of a Chopin Nocturne. And it's painstaking to play Chopin Nocturne without pedal if you've never done it before. I practice all my music without the pedal a lot. That's one of my primary practicing techniques. And if you don't do that in your practice, try it. At first, you'll think it sounds terrible. But once you make it sound good without the pedal, you're going to pedal entirely differently, number one. And you're going to get more sustain to your playing than you've ever had before. It's going to be a whole different level of playing. So I'm going to play a little bit of the B-flat minor Nocturne, no pedal, and listen how legato, how connected I get both hands without the pedal. Great practice that way. It's very hard to get that left hand in particular to be legato when you don't use the pedal. Now when I add the pedal, it just adds color. I don't have to use the pedal to connect what I'm not connecting with my hands. And listen what happens. So what it really comes down to is when you practice without pedal a great extent, instead of using the pedal to correct problems of connection and legato in your hands, you transcend that and start using the pedal to add color and shadings to your music, to enhance the melody, and to connect the things that you really absolutely can't connect with your hands. So, great way to practice pedal, as I said. Practice without the pedal when you learn to get the best fingering and connections as possible, as you possibly can. Then when you add the pedal, you will be in great shape. Moving on to some more advanced pedal techniques. You know, the pedals are not a really black and white issue. The pedals, as I mentioned, can affect tone in so many different ways. And I can demonstrate this on this piano. Even though this is a digital piano, it's a very advanced instrument. And as a result, it responds in many of the ways that an acoustic piano responds. Not in all the ways, however. So you're going to have to try some of these things that I'm telling you on your piano, assuming you have an acoustic piano. You probably are already aware of this, but let me show you. If I play a note with no pedal, you get one tone. Now, if I put the pedal down, that is the sustained pedal, and I play the note now, you're going to get a different sound. It echoes more. That's because when the damper pedal is engaged, all the dampers come up from all the strings of all 88 keys of the piano. In doing so, they sympathetically vibrate. In fact, you can go over to your piano, put the damper pedal down, and sing into your piano, and your piano will start echoing. Have you ever tried that? It's a lot of fun. It's a cool sound. You can use that same element in your music by enhancing the tone of the notes you play on the piano. Now, at this point, I've got to talk a little bit because we've got a digital instrument that doesn't give all the nuances of your acoustic instrument that you may have in front of you. If you press the pedal before you play the note, you get one tone. But if you press the note and then depress the pedal after, you get a different shape to the tone. What is the biggest challenge of the piano? The biggest challenge of the piano is getting a sustained line, to make it sound like a wind instrument or a bowed instrument, not percussive. You don't want the notes to sound like they're all fading out. You want it to sound like it's rising and falling, that has a natural phrasing to it, just like the human voice. To get a singing tone out of the piano, the pedals are incredibly instrumental in doing so. Let me explain. You can actually change the shape of the tone of the piano by how you, when you pedal. If I were to play a note and put the pedal down after, you get a more sustained tone than if I put the pedal down before. Because by putting down the pedal before, it echoes very loud and then gets soft gradually from there. Whereas if I play the note and get that sharp attack and then put the pedal down, we smooth out the envelope so that it doesn't have quite as quick as a decay. So it's a wonderful thing that you can do to change the tone and the sustain of your piano playing. Experiment with when you push down the pedal. Try it on single notes in your piano and you'll see just what I'm talking about. There's also half pedal techniques. The dampers are not on or off. In fact, once again, this Roland piano is very sophisticated, and I can get half pedal techniques on here. Watch, if I play this chord and slowly lift it up, you hear how it slowly, it doesn't abruptly cut off the note, but it now if I release the pedal quickly, it will abruptly cut off the chord. You hear the difference? So that sometimes when you want to, for example, you're holding a chord at the end of a beautiful piece, and you want it to slowly fade out, you slowly release the pedal and release the hands, and you effect a fade out that's a little bit faster than the fade out that you will get just holding the notes with the pedal and then releasing abruptly. The end of a beautiful piece you can have that mood linger so nicely if you fade out, let it fade by itself, and then slowly release your sustain pedal. Sometimes even when you're playing, using just dashes of pedal can enhance the tone selectively. You have to use your ears for this. This isn't something that can be written in because it might not be the same. You could have the same piano on the same stage in the same hall on the same day, and you go there that afternoon and try the piano and experiment with pedaling, and then later when the audience comes in, just the bodies, the hundreds of people or thousands of people in the audience will soak up so much more of the sound that the room acoustics become more dead because it soaks up the reverberation, and your pedal is going to be different. So you always have to be listening, which is the whole key to music anyway, but particularly with the use of the pedal. Let's move on to the next pedal, the Sostenuto pedal, the middle pedal. Sometimes I refer to it as the mystery pedal. The mystery pedal because so few people seem to know what this darn pedal does. You know, in most parts of the world, there is no middle pedal. In fact, the middle pedal is there for the American market to a great extent, and even pianos that are sold in this country have middle pedals, but the same instruments that Yamaha produces and Kawai and other manufacturers produce their same instruments with only 2 pedals for the other parts of the world. In Europe, this country, you know, more, we like more, everything bigger, better. So we like 3 pedals on our pianos. Most of the world has 2 pedals. So what is it with this pedal? What does it do? Well, it does different things on different pianos. I'm going to first tell what it does if your piano is a vertical or an upright piano, spinet or console, rather than a grand, because it does not do the same thing on vertical pianos as it does on a grand piano. What it probably does on your piano, if it's an older instrument, it's probably a bass sustain pedal, meaning that instead of holding all the notes across the keyboard, it probably only holds the notes from here on down. So that would enable you to play like a chord down here, and then notice it's holding that octave for me, but these notes are not holding. So that's what a bass sustain pedal does on most vertical pianos. On newer vertical pianos, the pedal is actually a practice pedal. You push the pedal down, and then you put your foot over to the left. It locks it in and puts felt between the hammers and the strings, making it really quiet, so you could practice your piano at night. This is a more recent innovation in pianos, in vertical pianos, the assumption being that people buying vertical pianos are probably living in condominiums and apartments, and they don't want it to be too loud. They want to practice when people are sleeping and not to disturb neighbors. So that's what it does on vertical pianos. You can try your piano to see what it does. Now, what the true Sostenuto pedal does on a grand piano is quite remarkable. What it does, it's a selective hold pedal. So if whatever notes I have down before I push the pedal, and will continue to hold as long as I'm holding them when I push the pedal. So if I push down, for example, C major chord, and push down my middle pedal, those notes hold, but no other notes do. You hear that? As long as I have the middle pedal down, only the notes that I push down before I push it. I push these notes, then push the pedal. They're locked in. Only those notes are locked in. You can see that? Now, you're saying, why would you ever want to use that? Well, once again, it's not called upon very often. Like I say, most of the world doesn't even have this pedal. But if you wanted to have an effect like holding something down here, you can get very dramatic effects with the middle pedal. The Sostenuto pedal enables you to basically have 3 hands. You can have one hand down here, lock it in, and then play up here, and still have control with your sustain pedal. So that's what that pedal is all about. It's not used very much, so don't worry if you don't have it on your piano, or if you've never used it, don't worry about it. I've rarely had an opportunity to use it, and I've always had it at my disposal. You know, it's like I wish I could use it more too. You know, it almost feels like a waste. I guess we should all move to Europe or Asia so that we don't feel badly about not using that middle pedal enough. I'm going to move on now because a much more important pedal is the soft pedal or the una corda pedal. And here again, on a vertical piano, this pedal does not do the same thing as it does on a grand piano. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even do the same thing on all grands. It should, on a grand, do its true function, which I'll get to in a minute. First, let me tell you what it does on a vertical. On a vertical piano, pushing this pedal makes all the hammers go closer to the strings. So it changes the action, it changes the feel, it makes it harder to play loud. It doesn't change the sound, it changes the action, the feel of the piano. So it effectively becomes a soft pedal, but it doesn't change the tone, it only changes the feel of the piano. So you have to push harder to get the same amount of sound out of it. Now this is an important distinction, because a true una corda pedal actually shifts the action over. You'll see the keys move. Have you ever noticed that on a grand piano? You push the left pedal, the soft pedal, and all the keys move over a little bit, not a lot. What it's doing is, as it shifts the entire action, the hammers also move over a little bit. And normally in your piano, there are 3 strings for each note. When you press the una corda pedal, the left pedal, it shifts it over so the hammers only strike 2 of the 3 strings. Una corda means 1 string, because early pianos had 2 strings, and pressing the una corda pedal made it hit 1 string. We still have the name una corda, even though the reality is that pressing this pedal makes the piano, the hammers strike 1 string instead of 2 strings, or 2 strings instead of 3 strings in most of the piano. Now, why is this so significant? Why am I making a big deal about this? Well, it is really a big deal, because as a pianist, you have so little actual control over tone. You have just your touch, you have your sustain pedal, but this una corda is a big deal. Let me tell you why. As I mentioned before, we're always fighting the fact that the notes are dying away for the moment you play them. It's almost gone. It's gone already. Boy, that was short-lived, wasn't it? Anything we can do to make that tone live longer is so important. That's why we love to have big grand pianos, because the longer strings sustain the tone more. The una corda pedal, because the hammers strike only 2 of the 3 strings, you get a softer initial attack. But the sustain is just as loud because the 3 strings end up sympathetically vibrating. So you get a softer initial attack and just as much of a sustain for a more sustained tone. Listen on this piano, because this piano does have a physical model of a true shifting una corda pedal designed into it, so you can hear the difference. I'm going to play the same melody, and as the melody comes back, you'll see when I put the una corda down, you'll hear a difference in the tone. Now the una corda pedals engage. Did you hear the difference? It's not just softer, it's a different tonal quality. And that's what's so great about the una corda pedal. And you can use the una corda pedal in any time you want, not just a softer sound, but a different tone. Very exciting to have that. One of the great reasons to have a good grand piano is to have a true shifting una corda pedal. To find out if your piano has one, simply depress the pedal. If the keys move slightly over, then you have it. And you can experiment with the tone. At first you might think, oh, I don't hear any difference. But play and listen, and you will hear a difference. It's there, it's real, and it's one of the beautiful things about a fine piano, is that you can have this tonal control. You know, of course, you have 2 feet and 3 pedals. So what about using these pedals in combination with one another? Naturally, we do this. In fact, using the pedals in combination, a lot of times you'll use the sustain pedal with the una corda pedal. And in using it judiciously, you can get the most sustained tone possible out of a piano. The una corda pedal engaged already gives more of a sustained quality by making the initial attack of the note softer. And then after the note is played, pushing down the sustain pedal, after it's played, then continues to make that note live on longer. so you can really get a sustained melody. I'm going to play, once again, that same melody with no pedal and then with the two pedals, and listen to the difference. Now both pedals. Quite a difference. So this is the way to get a real true singing tone, no matter how much the work is to get it as connected as possible with no pedal at all. But once you have that, experiment with your pedals in combination, and you can have tremendous control over your tone, getting a more sustained tone out of your piano. It's definitely worth considering. You know, there's different ways of approaching pedaling depending on the period of music you're playing. For example, the Baroque era, the piano really wasn't invented on, it was sort of invented. It was in such its infancy at the time that most of the Baroque music we play of Bach and Handel, Scarlatti, was not written for the piano at all. And although these instruments had pedals, they did not have pedals as we know them on a piano. They had pedals that changed the tone fundamentally, much like stops in an organ engage different sets of pipes. Pedals on a harpsichord or clavichord engage different sets of strings and felt and such to drastically change the tone. So what about using the pedal in Bach or Scarlatti? Well, some people are purists and feel that you shouldn't because there was no sustained pedal. Why should you use a sustained pedal in the music? Well, I can see the logic to that, and sometimes it's appropriate, but you know what? When you play Bach on a piano, you're essentially transcribing the music because Bach didn't play his music on the piano. And even the piano that was just starting to be invented at the time was closer to what a harpsichord was than it is to a modern piano. So if you're playing it on a modern piano, there's no reason not to use the pedal, although very sparingly. You should not use the pedal in the way that I just showed you with Chopin at all. It came much later in the Romantic period. Let me play a little bit of a Bach French suite, and I'm going to play first with no pedal to show you that it can work great with no pedal at all. And then I'm going to repeat the section and use the pedal, and I want you to look at how I use it. I use it so little, just for color more than anything else, just to add little color, little tonal shadings, but not enough to sound like I'm using the pedal. So I'm going to play through this first section of a French suite, no pedal. Then when I take the repeat, I'm going to use pedal, but notice how the little bit I use. The pedal comes in. I don't know if you could see what I was doing there. You know, I never really stopped to think about it. If I had to write out what I'm doing on the pedaling, it would be like a zillion little squiggly lines on the page. because they're just little dashes of pedal just for color. You're better off not using pedal at all in Bach unless you really are very, very comfortable with the music, because, you know, it's really just a color thing, and it's a disaster if you use too much pedal. You would never want to pedal, keep the pedal down for more than little spurts, otherwise you'll get this. Obviously, that's not acceptable. So the secret of Bach is only color, just to enhance the tone, little more than that. Do it with your fingers. Make sure that you can play the music appropriately and make it sound great with no pedal. Then add like a little bit of seasoning, just a touch of spice. That's about all you really want to use the pedal for in Baroque music. Spice, flavor, just a little bit. All right. Moving on to the classical period of music, now we have real pianos. The piano was invented. But have you ever heard or played a pianoforte, a period instrument of Mozart or even Beethoven? These instruments are drastically different from the modern piano. In fact, during Mozart's early lifetime, there wasn't even a sustained pedal, just a lever operated with the knee to sustain the tone. The pedal only started to come about and really be pretty common during Beethoven's life. So once again, pedal is not as pervasive in musical performances because it simply wasn't required of the music, because they didn't have pedals on all the pianos, really. But you can definitely enhance the music of the classical in, I would say, because it was a real piano and they had a lever, a sustained lever, you definitely want to take advantage of the pedal. You just don't want it to become blurry. A slow movement of Mozart is a good way to demonstrate how the pedal can really enhance. But I'm going to show you something. I'm going to play a little bit of the Kochel 332, the F major, the second movement. And I'm going to play first with no pedal, and then I'm going to show you something I can do with my touch, even before I add the pedal. So once again, you can do so much more with your hands instead of just relying with the pedal. So listen to a little bit of this Mozart. Now, without using the pedal, instead of just playing the left hand like this, if we played it with the pedal, we'd get a tone like this. That's pretty, isn't it? You hear that? Instead of the... But the problem is, if I do that, the right hand gets all blurred together. So what if I could sustain the left hand with my fingers like this? I'm holding notes down so they're overlapping. So it almost sounds like I'm pedaling, but it frees me up to use the pedal for color in the melody instead of just to connect what I can connect with my hands. So now when I play the left hand like that, and I add the pedal not to connect the left hand, because I'm connecting that with my fingers, now I can use the pedal for coloring in my melody. So much nicer, because even if I played it without the pedal, I still have the sustained quality of my left hand. This is without the pedal, but I'm holding those notes. But it frees me to use the pedal as an expressive device, to make that melody more sustained while I connect the notes with my left hand. So you shouldn't rely on the pedal to connect, once again, that old rule. You shouldn't use the pedal to connect what you already can connect or should connect with your hands. If you find the right fingering, you're going to be able to connect a lot more with your hands and use the pedal to take your playing up to this level, to use it for expressiveness and beauty of the tone instead of merely as a crutch to do what you should already be doing with your hands. The Romantic era, The 19th century, that's where the piano becomes a fully developed instrument, and boy, the pedal is certainly required. I already played some Chopin. I'm going to play more because Chopin is such a great example of why the pedal is absolutely fundamental to this music. I love to play, here's a little excerpt from the G minor ballade, which I played another section to earlier. Listen what this sounds like without any pedal. And it's really interesting to play it. I'm going to play it slowly first so you see what's going on, because this is an example of ingenious piano writing indigenous to the piano. Unlike what came before with the classical era and certainly the Baroque, which wasn't even piano music, this is piano music. It wouldn't work on any other instrument, and it's ingenious writing. Watch this. Now it doesn't. This is almost like taking pictures, like flipping pictures. You see one picture at a time, and it doesn't look like anything, and then you speed it up, and then you got a movie. You know, because I can take the same thing and play it fast now without the pedal, because it's still going to be separate images until I put the pedal in. Then it smooths it out, and it becomes the living, breathing, in motion, expressive piece of music that it is. I'm going to play it without up the tempo now. The same thing with no pedal. Well, it sounds harder, but it's still like, well, what the heck is that? Now, when I add the pedal, Chopin was a genius. He knew how to write for the piano. Listen what this becomes. It's remarkable, isn't it? That he knew what this thing would sound like, to figure out note by note, much less to understand what it would be like up to tempo, but to have the concept of what the pedal would add to this. You know, it's really amazing writing. And you'll see that again and again in Chopin's writing, and to a great extent in other Romantic composers, but particularly in the music of Chopin, where the pedal is such an instrumental part of it. And you can hear there, it's a perfect example of how the pedal is totally intrinsic with the musical performance, that it doesn't even make sense without the pedal. So when you learn it, you have to learn it painstakingly and get it all connected and get it up to speed, then add the pedal once again, and then it'll come to life. Suddenly, there it is, you know. So I could give you dozens of examples in Chopin and Schumann, all the music. If I tried to play that without the pedal, it wouldn't sound like anything. Yeah, it sounds like an exercise, right? The pedal to Romantic music, it fleshes it out. It really does. It like takes the skeleton, it takes all the parts, and it's like it's the final coat of paint that brings it to light. The icing on the cake, if you will. You know, it really enhances the music. It does so much to it. Whereas before it was just touches of color, now it's a whole other experience, because the pedal is fundamentally different in early music. You know, in the Impressionist music, the French had some very interesting music that used the pedal in such innovative ways to express colors, which is what, you know, we talked about so much with the pedal anyway. So it's natural that the French Impressionists in the late 19th century and early 20th century would make use of this. Listen to, for example, the beginning of Pour le Piano by Debussy. We get to use the middle pedal in conjunction with the sustain pedal. And you'll see if I remember this, all right? Middle pedal. holding that low octave. Again, it holds. And you hear the colors here. Isn't it great the way he just holds that octave down here and there's all this other stuff around it. And yet we have the freedom to use the sustain pedal all the while. And again in Impressionist music, and moving on to 20th century music, the pedals can be used in such innovative ways. You know, sometimes I can't demonstrate all the ways the pedal can be used, although this digital offers tremendous expressiveness with the pedals that you don't find in most instruments. There are areas in which the pedal goes even further that are taken into account on in 20th century compositions. The fact that you can silently, you can hold a chord and then play another chord, and it will sympathetically vibrate. There are really cool tricks that I'd love to be able to show you. But I'm so glad I was able to show you all of these tricks. I want to digress just for a moment. I talked about Beethoven, and I kind of skirted over him. But there was one other thing I wanted to mention about. You know, in Mozart, they just had a lever that was used for sustaining, so the pedaling was not as pervasive. But Beethoven's lifetime was a milestone for piano development. And in fact, he used the pedal quite extensively and even wrote in pedal markings in his music sometimes. So we get ideas of what he was after. The pianos of his period, though, didn't sustain as long as the piano, modern piano, where the tone is longer. So we have, for example, in one of his sonatas, what is it, the Tempest? I don't even know what sonata this is. I just pulled a page out of one of the sonatas here. And he has a whole section sustained on one pedal to give an effect. And listen how beautiful this is. This is where the pedal goes down, and it's written to stay down during all of this. It gets quite an effect there, doesn't it? You have to remember, though, sometimes the pedal markings in Haydn and Beethoven, you have to take with a grain of salt a little bit, because the pianos didn't sustain as long as the pianos sustain today. So they'll write a whole section like that. Sometimes you need to do little half pedal techniques if the notes are becoming too blurry and too dissonant. Remember that you are essentially transcribing Beethoven's music for the modern piano. His piano sounded very different. But it's interesting how Beethoven took advantage of the pedal in much, much more extreme ways than Mozart did. Haydn had some interesting places where he also explored open pedal, such as this. So we have some time for some questions now, and we have one that just popped up on the screen and popped away again. I'm sure that they're probably shy, right? Here we go. Debbie asks, should I follow the pedal markings in my music book? Well, it depends what level you're on. If you're more of a beginner or intermediate student, absolutely, and have your teacher write in pedal markings for you. Incidentally, pedal markings are written in two different ways. Either just PED period is where you put the pedal down, and then a star where the pedal comes up. That's traditional. Sometimes you'll even see bars where a line goes down and continues and then goes back up again. and you put the pedal down where the line starts and lift it up where it ends. Or the line goes down. At a certain point, you see a little bleep, like on, you watch ER or something like that, where you see the heart go bleep, and that's where you lift the pedal up and right back down again. And incidentally, very important, when do you change the pedal? One of the most important points that I could bring up, and I'm glad I'm bringing it up just in the nick of time. The pedal does not go down in rhythm, because if you put the pedal down on a note, you'll always capture the previous harmonies. The pedal instead comes up on the new harmony and then goes down always after. So if I wanted to pedal this chord and then play another chord, watch my foot now. As I play the next chord, it comes up when I play it and right back down again. Up when I play it and right down again. See how it goes up when I play? If I play the pedal down when I play the chord, this is what happens. Now you hear both harmonies. So we have two notes in it. You hear that? So what you need to do instead is, and then play the new note. It comes up when you play the new note and right down again. So remember that. Very important point. I'm glad I remembered just in time. David says, do you suggest using pedal in the Bach two-part Inventions? You're talking about... The Bach two-part Inventions are such distinct pieces with only two lines. I think pedal is absolutely unnecessary in that writing. In some of the more sophisticated Bach writing, like the French suites that I demonstrated earlier, the chromatic fantasy and fugue, some of the more sophisticated music, pedal touches and color of pedal is great. In the Inventions, I think it's completely unnecessary. Just play with your hands, get the clear lines. So I'd say I wouldn't suggest using the pedal in Bach two-part Inventions. Ron, we have about time for one more question, and Ron asks, does the pedal work on a player piano? This is a very interesting question. On a straight-ahead player piano, the answer is no. But did you know there were some instruments called expressive players that were invented in the turn of the century that did utilize the pedal and the dynamics of each note of the piano? And so these old rolls and their historic performances of pianists such as Grieg and Debussy and early performances of Rachmaninoff and Hoffman, where they played on these expressive player pianos, and we now have these rolls converted onto CD, the performances with pianos that have been restored, and you can hear these early performances. Some pianists who never had the opportunity to record any other way because they died before modern recording technology was around. So yes, there are some player pianos that the pedals do work. Modern player pianos like the Pianomation system, for example, also use the pedals. So you can actually hear performances of modern pianists on a modern player that use CDs that reproduce performances with all the nuances of touch and with pedal. Excellent question. It's been a pleasure bringing all this to you. I appreciate the questions, and thank you very much. Next week we have another exciting show for you. Hit those archives. A lot of great shows for you there. This is Bob Estrin saying thank you so much for joining us today in Keyboard Kaleidoscope. See you next week.